battlefield was silent, only for a moment. Then screams filled the air. Roman warriors had won, but victory came at a human cost, one that history almost never records, and among the captives the women faced a fate worse than death. Smoke rose from the city as soldiers moved through shattered homes. Women and children had been rounded up, trembling, clutching whatever they could carry. Some were dragged by the hair. Others were forced to kneel while their male relatives were executed. In the chaos, one woman dared to look up at a Roman officer. His expression was calm, but calm meant control would decide her fate. Hundreds of captives were marched from the battlefield, their homes burned, crops destroyed, livelihoods gone. Roman victories were not just about territory, they were about asserting dominance. And the women? They were now pawns in a system of power, humiliation, and survival. To understand their suffering, we have to see the battlefield not just through swords, but through eyes that had no voice. Among the captives was Julia, a girl of 17, taken from her village in Gaul. She had witnessed the death of her father and brothers. Now she was surrounded by Roman soldiers who treated her as nothing more than property. Her first night was in a makeshift camp. She was not beaten yet, but fear was a weapon in itself. Sleep was impossible. Every shout, every crack of a whip nearby reminded her freedom was gone. Roman soldiers didn't need to strike every woman to assert dominance. One glance, one command, one rearranged line of captives could instill obedience. The women learned quickly. Survival depended on silence, on invisibility, on waiting. Even small gestures, looking up, speaking out, could mark them for punishment. By the second day, Julia realized something terrifying. The men did not need to hurt her to dominate her. Threat was enough. The fear of what could happen, the uncertainty of her fate, was its own punishment. Each time a soldier laughed, or an officer gave a command to another captive, she felt her world shrink. And this was only the beginning. What awaited them in the city was far worse. In the next chapter, we'll see what happened when these women reached the city. The public humiliation, the forced labor, and the brutal system that treated survival as submission. This wasn't punishment for a crime. It was punishment for being a woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. In Rome, law didn't protect captured women. It defined them as property, and once a woman was a prize of war, her life belonged to the conquerors. The Roman legal system treated captured women as res, property, rather than individuals. Soldiers could sell, trade, or assign them to households. Punishment or reward was arbitrary. Survival depended on obedience, silence, and sometimes pure luck. One wrong glance at a general, one whispered protest, could mean reassignment to the worst tasks. Far from family, far from any protection, women in Roman society were already limited by strict social norms. But war amplified this vulnerability. Captured women weren't just victims, they were symbols of conquest. Public display, humiliation, and forced labor reinforced Roman authority while erasing their identity. The same legal code that protected Roman citizens became a weapon against the conquered. Livia, from a small town near modern France, was 18. She was brought to Rome as part of a triumph parade, displayed for senators and citizens alike. Her father had been executed, her brothers enslaved. The public attention, meant to glorify Roman victory, became a cage. Every stare reminded her she was powerless, invisible as a human being, but hypervisible as a trophy. Captives were stripped of their former status. Nobility, wealth, titles, meaningless in Roman hands, paraded, assigned labor, or sold. Every act was a lesson. Obedience was not optional. Even private homes became tools of punishment. Women served households, performing exhausting chores under strict supervision. One misstep could escalate: verbal reprimands, denial of food, or reassignment to harsher environments. Julia, another captive, discovered that survival was about visibility and invisibility. She learned to avoid eye contact, speak only when necessary, and anticipate commands. Any act of defiance could endanger not just herself, but others nearby. Silence became her shield. Submission became survival. This constant tension, fear without immediate punishment, was a psychological weapon. The Romans didn't need daily violence to control captives. Every parade, every labor assignment, every command reinforced their subjugation, and behind every action was law and culture telling them, "You have no rights here." Survival was not a choice, it was a calculation. One miscalculated step could destroy everything. Next, we'll witness the women's journey from public humiliation to private suffering. The forced labor, relentless control, and the hidden cruelty that history almost never records. The moment a woman was seized by Roman warriors, her life changed forever. No home, no family, no protection, only fear, uncertainty, and the invisible chains of conquest. The battlefield was littered with the fallen. Smoke rose from burning villages. Soldiers shouted orders, dragging survivors toward the Roman lines. Women, girls, and even mothers with infants were rounded up, their faces streaked with dust and tears, their hands shaking. Some clutched what little belongings they had left. Others were snatched mid-scream. The air smelled of blood, sweat, and ash. And through it all, one truth became clear. Their fate was no longer their own. Julia, a 17-year-old girl from Gaul, saw her village destroyed. Her father had been killed, her brothers sold as slaves. She tried to hide in a cellar, but a soldier found her. He grabbed her by the arm. She stumbled, fear clawing at her chest. That single moment, the first touch of captivity, would define the next years of her life. In Rome, she would learn that fear alone could control her, long before violence ever touched her body. The captives were marched to temporary camps or directly to the city, their heads bowed, hands bound, eyes darting at every soldier. Families were separated. Mothers lost children, sisters lost sisters. The trauma of immediate, permanent separation was a punishment in itself. In the camps, overcrowded and unsanitary, survival was already a test. Every glance could signal favor or punishment. Every word spoken could seal your fate. Roman soldiers understood one thing: uncertainty is a weapon. They didn't need to hit everyone. Julia could hear screams from other captives, the clatter of chains, the shouted commands, all without knowing if she would be next. This constant state of fear and unpredictability wore down the mind faster than any whip. And it was just the beginning. Some captives were paraded in triumphs through the city, streets lined with cheering citizens, senators, and Roman officers. But for the women, it wasn't celebration. It was humiliation. Every cheer, every gaze, reminded them they were trophies, not people. Julia's face burned with shame, but she could not look away. The public display was not just a punishment. It was a demonstration of power, meant to break spirits and teach obedience to all who witnessed it. Captives were selected for different fates, some to labor, some to households, some sold to strangers. Julia was chosen to serve a high-ranking officer. Her anxiety intensified. She realized compliance could save her life. Disobedience could cost it. Every glance, every misstep, every word could mean a harsher punishment or a transfer to worse conditions. In the next chapter, we'll witness what awaited these women inside the city: the endless labor, public humiliation, and hidden cruelty that history has almost forgotten. For the captured women, victory for Rome meant endless labor, public shame, and invisible chains that crushed the spirit long before any sword did. Julia and the other captives were marched through the city gates. Citizens crowded the streets, pointing, whispering, laughing. Roman soldiers pushed them forward, sometimes striking lightly with staffs to keep them moving. For Julia, the humiliation was immediate. Her private grief displayed to a cheering crowd. She understood quickly: in Rome, visibility was power, invisibility was survival. Once inside the city, captives were assigned to households, workshops, and construction projects. Julia was sent to a senator's villa to clean, cook, and serve under constant supervision. Hours blended into days. Mistakes were punished subtly. A cold meal, delayed water, public ridicule. She realized punishment didn't need chains. Obedience was enforced psychologically, minute by minute. Women were sometimes displayed in forums, markets, or triumphs, stripped of titles, dressed plainly, or made to carry burdens for the amusement of citizens. Every laugh, every stare reminded them they were trophies, not humans. One mistake in the household, spilling water, burning bread, could result in soldiers publicly humiliating them in front of neighbors. Humiliation became a daily routine, wearing down courage and identity. Each day began before dawn. Julia would clean floors, cook meals, and attend to children she had never met. Any sign of resistance or emotion was punished silently. She learned to smile when needed, speak only when spoken to, and anticipate every command. Her body obeyed before her mind did. Every small act of compliance became a shield, but her spirit quietly shrank. Roman soldiers and households enforced obedience without constant violence. Punishment was embedded in routine. Delayed food, isolation, overwork, verbal scolding, subtle, invisible yet crushing. Each day the captives internalized control. Fear, shame, and exhaustion became weapons far stronger than chains. Julia discovered a strategy: blend in, obey, survive. Any expression of anger, sorrow, or defiance risked reassignment to worse labor or public shaming. She learned to disappear in plain sight, her body there, her spirit guarded. Survival became a psychological game, one she had to win every day. Next, we'll uncover the most shocking forms of control: sexual exploitation, manipulation, and the hidden cruelty that history almost never recorded. In Rome, victory over women was more than conquest. It was control through fear, labor, and the cruelest weapon of all, sexual exploitation. Roman society treated women as property in war. Captives could be assigned to households, given as gifts, or exploited by powerful men. Sexual access was not random, it was strategic. A woman's compliance could elevate her owner's status, while disobedience could destroy her. For many captives, survival depended on learning quickly what behavior kept them alive and unnoticed. Julia, now in a senator's household, was given tasks under the watchful eyes of the family and their allies. At first she feared the men would strike her, but it wasn't blows that controlled her. It was access, proximity, and power. The glance too long, a word too bold, could mean reassignment to worse conditions, or sexual exploitation by someone higher ranking. Julia realized her body and presence were weapons in a system she had no control over. Sexual exploitation was a tool of hierarchy. A favored woman might gain minimal privileges, better meals, slightly lighter labor, but at the cost of total submission. Those who resisted or were deemed unworthy were punished. Isolation, transfer to harsher households, or worse, assigned to men who would assert dominance through fear and coercion. The message was clear: compliance ensured survival, resistance guaranteed suffering. Julia learned the unspoken rules quickly: obey silently, keep your head low, smile when necessary. She observed other captives and noted who survived, who disappeared, who fell victim to exploitation. Every day was a psychological balancing act. Survival was no longer about strength, courage, or rebellion. It was calculated invisibility. The fear, uncertainty, and constant monitoring began to take a mental toll. Captives described sleepless nights, constant anxiety, and hyper-awareness of every glance and gesture. Even small acts of kindness or attention could destabilize a woman's position. Obedience was drilled into the body long before consent was considered. By now, Julia's identity was slowly being rewritten. Survival first, self last. Next, we'll uncover rare stories of resistance, attempted escape, and the brutal consequences for those who dared defy Rome's unyielding system. Some women tried to resist, some tried to escape, but in Rome, defiance was met with cruelty so precise it crushed hope before it could grow. Julia observed other captives whispering plans of rebellion. Some tried to sabotage chores or hide small items as acts of defiance, but Roman oversight was meticulous. Soldiers, servants, and even fellow captives under threat acted as enforcers. Resistance, even minor, invited immediate punishment. Public shaming, harsher labor, or reassignment to more abusive households. One young woman, Claudia, tried to flee her assigned household at night. She crawled through alleyways, praying not to be seen. A soldier spotted her after only a few meters. The punishment was not just physical, it was psychological. She was paraded through the streets, hands bound, forced to kneel before her peers. Fear was reinforced publicly. Disobedience leads to humiliation. The Romans relied on fear and observation. Even the suggestion of rebellion was punished before it could be acted upon. Julia understood quickly. Survival didn't depend on courage or resistance. It depended on anticipation and compliance. Every glance, gesture, or whisper could be interpreted as defiance, and punishment followed silently but swiftly. Another captive, Libya, refused to serve a powerful official properly. Her punishment was subtle but devastating. Isolation, denied meals, and transfer to a harsher household. For weeks, she was forced to work in the shadows, ignored by everyone, watching others enjoy privileges she would never regain. Survival had become a game of endurance, submission, and invisible compliance. Captives internalized fear so deeply that compliance became instinct. Hope was dangerous. Even dreams of freedom could trigger punishment if discovered. Julia began to monitor herself constantly. How she moved, what she said, even how she breathed. The punishment system had succeeded. Rebellion was erased before it began. Next, we'll examine the devastating long-term effects, mental, emotional, and social, on these women, and how history almost erased their suffering entirely. Victory for Rome left its mark, not on the battlefield, but in the minds of the captured women. Scars invisible, but far deeper than any wound. Julia had survived the capture, the marches, the public humiliation, and forced labor. But her nights were haunted. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams replayed screams, laughter, and the faces of lost family. Anxiety tightened her chest. Every sudden sound triggered panic. The battle was over, but the trauma had just begun. Another captive, Claudia, began to dissociate. She performed chores mechanically, but her mind wandered. She forgot conversations, lost track of time, and felt as if her own body belonged to someone else. The psychological manipulation, constant surveillance, unpredictable punishments, and public humiliation eroded her sense of self. Survival had become instinct, but identity was slipping away. Historical records hint at the consequences. Women returned home, if they survived, carrying invisible chains. Anxiety, insomnia, muteness, and hypervigilance were common. Some avoided all attention. Others withdrew entirely from social life. Their bodies were free, but their minds remained captive, a lasting imprint of conquest. Julia learned to cope in small ways. She memorized routines, focused on chores, and avoided eye contact. Yet, even routine was a reminder of her captivity. The constant calculation of behavior, the fear of observation, and the invisible weight of submission. These coping strategies were survival, but also a form of slow self-erasure. Roman captors relied on subtlety. Punishment didn't have to be violent to be effective. Fear, humiliation, labor, and social manipulation created a system where women policed themselves, erasing resistance before it began. The psychological toll ensured compliance far longer than chains ever could. Next, we'll explore how captured women were forced into households, marriages, or exile, and how the empire used them to secure power long after the battle ended. For Roman captives, survival often meant marriage, but not love. These women became tools in a political game, lives controlled by strangers with power over life and death. Women captured in war were assigned to households as laborers or concubines. They were given roles carefully designed to assert the family's dominance and reinforce Roman authority. Every act of obedience, cleaning, cooking, serving, was a reminder that their past status, family, and independence no longer mattered. Julia was married off to a minor Roman official. Officially, it was presented as a social integration, but it was a tool of political control. She had no choice in the union. Her life, her labor, her body, all became assets to secure the man's political standing. Survival now depended on obedience, silence, and endurance, not courage or rebellion. These marriages and household integrations were rarely personal. They were political. Families gained influence, soldiers secured loyalty, and captives became living symbols of conquest. Their compliance reinforced social hierarchies. For the women, disobedience could still result in punishment, reassignment, or further humiliation. A reminder that their autonomy was gone. Julia learned to navigate her new household. She observed which behaviors earned favor, which triggered punishment, and how to survive politically. Every smile, every gesture, every word was calculated. Survival had become a constant performance. One wrong move could erase any sense of security she had built. Captives integrated into Roman households rarely regained independence. Their original identities were erased, names forgotten, past lives dissolved, and futures dictated by the empire's power structure. Psychological impact compounded. Obedience became instinct, fear became constant, and hope became a dangerous thought. Next, we'll uncover the hidden stories, voices that history almost erased, and the lessons we can learn about power, survival, and resilience in the shadow of conquest. History often celebrates conquest, but it rarely remembers the women who lived and suffered in its shadow. Their voices, almost erased, tell a story of survival, resilience, and hidden cruelty. Julia, Claudia, Livia, names recorded only in fragments, if at all. Diaries, letters, and whispers hint at their lives. Working from dawn to dusk, forced into households, navigating fear, humiliation, and exploitation. These stories were rarely documented officially, yet they reveal a human cost that no victory could erase. Julia survived by blending obedience with observation. She memorized routines, learned to anticipate danger, and protected her mind from despair. Though her life was controlled by others, her inner spirit adapted. Survival became her rebellion, subtle, silent, and enduring. The captive's experiences left permanent marks. Anxiety, hypervigilance, dissociation, and fear became part of their daily existence. Even when free, the mind carried the shadow of captivity, a constant reminder that survival often demanded the erasure of self. Some women found small ways to resist, comfort each other, or preserve memories of home. They exchanged words and whispers, shared food, or simply offered silent solidarity. These acts were invisible to history but monumental in maintaining human dignity under extreme oppression. Rome's conquest teaches a harsh truth. Power can dominate without constant violence. Fear, control, humiliation, and manipulation can break minds long before bodies. These women's stories remind us that survival is not always bravery in the open. Sometimes it is quiet endurance, adaptation, and subtle defiance. In the final chapter, we'll conclude the hidden legacy of these women, the lessons, the lost voices, and the unrecorded stories that still echo through history. The battles ended, the cities stood, and Rome celebrated victory. But the true cost of conquest lived on in the minds, hearts, and lives of the women history almost forgot. Captured women like Julia, Claudia, and Livia carried scars long after chains were gone. Public humiliation, forced labor, sexual exploitation, and political manipulation left marks invisible to history books but devastatingly real. Survival meant obedience, adaptation, and the silent erasure of self. Lessons history rarely records, but would shape their entire lives. Julia, in her final years, often recalled the days of captivity. She remembered small victories, hiding a thought, preserving a memory, comforting another captive, though powerless in the grand schemes of Rome. These subtle acts were her resistance. History may have ignored them, but they were proof of resilience, endurance, and quiet courage. Countless others shared similar fates. They were nameless, faceless in historical records, yet their experiences reveal a systemic pattern of power, control, and psychological warfare. These hidden stories are not just about suffering. They are about survival, adaptability, and humanity under extreme oppression. From the Roman conquest, we learn that dominance doesn't always rely on force alone. Fear, humiliation, social manipulation, and exploitation can control people quietly, invisibly, and permanently. Studying these stories teaches resilience, empathy, and vigilance against injustice. Lessons as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. Even in captivity, small acts of resistance survived. Whispered words, stolen moments of solidarity, quiet defiance. These invisible victories preserved humanity. Julia's legacy, and that of countless others, reminds us that strength often lies not in rebellion, but in endurance, observation, and the courage to survive against overwhelming odds. History remembers empires, victories, and battles, but the hidden legacy belongs to the women who survived, who endured, and whose stories quietly defy the pages of time. Remember them, reflect on their courage, and consider the human cost behind every conquest celebrated in history.